Hello everyone, welcome to Star Psych, and today I want to talk about personality, personality type, and identity, and why I think it's important to make sure that you don't bunch all of these things together into one concept. I also want to talk about why I think it's important to make sure that you separate, especially your personality type, from your identity, and why you should make sure that you don't see these things as the same thing, especially when it comes to portraying yourself, your interests, and your values. Let's get into it. One of the biggest issues that I see with people who are especially newer to MBTI or other personality typology systems is that they get into them and they get their test results, they study it for a little bit, they find a type that they really kind of mesh with, and then that type almost consumes them. It becomes their identity instead of them being a person who relates to that thing because it's close to their identity. And this is almost a bit backwards, but I can see why this easily happens, because if you come across a generalization of personality or cognition that matches you, it's kind of like finding something or someone who understands you. It's like, oh, I finally feel like someone sees me for who I am. And because you now have this description, you almost want to be recognized as that description, because if you can be more like the description, it's almost like people will be able to understand you better. But this is kind of backwards when we're talking about personality and personality type, because in reality, what it should be is that you are being your authentic self, you're being the person that you are, and that just so happens to align with a personality type. And that way people can get to know you a little bit better by knowing a little bit about that personality type. To give an example of how this portrays itself not only within personality type, but human psychology in general, we can look at the age group of roughly 16 to 22, 24. This is the age group when people are trying on new masks. They're trying on different versions of themselves. If you go talk to a 16-year-old and ask them what their interests are, their values, these sorts of things, and then ask them again at 20, there is a decent chance that they're going to be someone completely different. I mean, they're going to have the same mannerisms and core values, but if you look at their general interests, hobbies, and even how they identify, there can be huge differences over a 3 or 4 year period. And this is because over this time span, this is when people want to try out new personalities. This is when they're going to be the most malleable. The brain hasn't finished developing until roughly 24 or 25, this age range. So it's the most flexible in terms of mentality. And this is when I also see this is the age group that people tend to struggle with identifying with their personality type the most. I very rarely find that people who are in their 30s and 40s, for example, over-identify with their personality type. This doesn't mean that they can't. Of course, I still see it sometimes. But I think if you're someone in this younger age group, you should be very careful when you're learning about personality type not to over-identify with the type in and of itself, and instead ask yourself the question, well, who am I in relation to the personality type? I am this person. This is who I am. This is my interests, or these are my interests. These are the things that are important to me. How does this relate to my personality type? Are there things that match here? Are there things that don't match? Because no matter how perfect the personality typing system is, you should still find things that don't match. When you're reading through those descriptions, there should at least be 1 or 2 things that you go, I'm not exactly sure if that fits with me, because that's completely normal, because 16 generalizations of personality isn't going to be enough to cover the whole human experience. And this is why I encourage people to remember that your identity should come before your personality type, especially in terms of how you portray yourself. You'll notice in my videos and when I talk about myself in relation to my personality type, I very rarely refer to myself as an INTJ unless I'm doing so to make a point for a video. I instead try to talk about the personality type in and of itself as a concept, instead of me, myself, as the INTJ, as a representative of what the INTJ thinks. Now, there's a few exceptions. I have a few videos where they're talking specifically about my personal interests as an INTJ. But for the most part, it's because I don't see myself as an INTJ being a core aspect of my personality. I am instead me who happens to be an INTJ, who happens to have the cognitive functions of introverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, and extroverted sensing in a specific order. And instead, for me, it's about what can I learn from my personality type? Why is it important to know my personality type? The personality type in and of itself isn't an identity factor for me. And people ask me occasionally, have you ever thought you might be a personality type? Or How bad would it be if you weren't an INTJ? And to me, it's like, well, it wouldn't really matter to me because I don't hold the label of INTJ as being something central to myself. It is instead something that I am able to learn from. It is something that exists. I won't say outside of myself because obviously it's important to me on some level, but it's not something that I consider a core aspect of my personality. And this is something that you can see in my interests, for example. Every now and then people will ask me, well, you want to be a psychologist and you want to work with people and do therapy and coaching and things. Isn't that really hard for an INTJ? And I say, well, maybe it's hard for the stereotype of an INTJ, but that doesn't mean I'm going to change my trajectory and do something that is not interesting to me because it doesn't one-to-one align with the descriptions of the stereotypical version of the personality type. And that's an example of why I think it's important to recognize that your identity and your interest should outweigh your personality type. If you have something that is really interesting to you, or you have things and ways of acting that are not normal for your personality type that you've always done, but then you read your personality type and changed, you should be the person that you are instead of being someone that you're not to match with the personality type that you've learned about. And it can become hard to draw the line sometimes, especially the more you learn about your personality type, the more you deep dive into these things, because the line of who am I and where do I start and where does the type start, it becomes hard to differentiate these things. So you just have to really be careful and start thinking about, well, who am I? What is important to me? What is interesting to me? What do I value? And are these things being influenced by the descriptions of the types? Or are these things that I actually deeply value? Or these ways in which I actually want to behave? Or these interests that I actually have? Don't let them all be influenced by your personality type in and of itself. One trap I really see people fall into when it comes to personality typology and identifying with their personality type is then they'll start to use their personality type as an excuse for behaving such a way or thinking certain things, or they'll try to justify their actions because I'm this personality type and therefore I do these things. And that's the completely wrong way to think about personality typology. You can't or you shouldn't, I should say, justify your actions based on your own personality type. So here's how I think about it when it comes to understanding personality typology and interacting with others. You can use personality typology to forgive and understand others, but you should never use it to justify your own negative actions. And what I mean by that is, let's say someone who doesn't know much about themselves does something to you that's kind of mean or upsetting or something, and you know their personality type or you have a good guesstimate to their personality type. You might be able to more easily forgive them because you can say, oh, well, he's got really high extroverted thinking in his function stack, so therefore I can understand why he might have come to that conclusion and why he was acting in such a way. Maybe I can talk to him and figure out where our wires were crossing, how we weren't seeing eye to eye. But instead, if you're on the other end of that spectrum, if you're the person with really high TE and you're being a jerk and yelling at people or something, you shouldn't say, well, it's just because I have high TE that I act this way. Because that's the completely wrong way to think about MBTI. You should never justify your own actions, thoughts, behaviors with your personality type, and instead use it to figure out how you can break the mold of things that might be negatively influencing your life. If you're someone with really high extroverted thinking, you can say, well, maybe I can learn to tone down myself a little bit. Maybe I can figure out how to be someone who speaks in a way that is more easily understandable to that will help me get along better with other people. It doesn't mean that you're trying to be someone you're not. It means you're learning to manage the things that you naturally do that are part of yourself. How can I make sure that these things, these ways of thinking and acting aren't going to negatively influence my life? The types that are absolutely the most guilty when it comes to over-identifying with their personality type or the aspects of their personality types are any of the intuitive types. Just almost all of them, especially considering and comparing them to the sensing types in general. You can really see this with the intuitive bias that has grown on the internet and in the typology community over the past, decade or so, where people really over-identify with the aspect of being an intuitive and what it means to be an intuitive. And you kind of see this in this weird portrayal that people think they're just different or that others really can't fully understand them. And it's because I'm intuitive, because I'm weird. And there is like some little aspect of truth to the intuitive maybe not fitting in as easily as some of the sensing types, but it doesn't stretch so far to the level that no one should be able to understand you, or you're just different, or you're just misunderstood. It's kind of like this aspect of the identity of like Sigma male that you see people identifying with these days. They're over identifying with something that is a complete miscategorization of the thing that they're identifying with. If you're an intuitive and you can't find yourself getting along with or interacting with other people, or it's hard for you to be understood, there might need to be some changes on your end. It might not just be that everyone else is really different from you and you're so unique and special. There's a good chance that maybe you just might be lacking in social skills in some area, or you have interests or ways of behaving that might be off-putting to a lot of other people. And I know this can be hard to hear because nobody wants to hear that it might be on their end, but that's part of personality growth. That's part of developing into someone better than you were yesterday, is recognizing your own flaws, your own mistakes, the kind of person you are and who you could be if you put in more effort to be someone more. That's why I really think it's important to recognize that you yourself and your identity should come first before your personality, and that you shouldn't use your personality type to justify any of your actions or your thoughts or your ways of acting, these sorts of things. Earlier in the video, I talked about how people who are younger, 16 to 24-ish, tend to be the most malleable when it comes to personality and personality typology because they're trying on new personality types. They're trying on new masks, figuring out who they are. Things haven't really settled in terms of their core personality and values just quite yet. And this is something that I think can really multiply negatively with being an intuitive type if someone isn't careful. And it's because I think that if someone who, say, for example, 16 stumbles across MBTI and they learn about intuitives, and then they learn that intuitives, are slightly more rare than other people, they're going to really strongly over-identify with this aspect of personality typology, and they're going to start feeling like other people can't understand them just because they're an intuitive type. And the pinnacle of this comes in what I call the both my parents and everyone I know are just sensing types syndrome. And this is the syndrome that it's like overwhelmingly present in people who are 18 or so, in that age group when it comes to personality typology, is they see almost everyone older than them, especially people who are related to them, as sensing types. And this is oftentimes probably not going to be completely true. Teenagers already, younger people already, even up until 24, 25, strongly feel like they aren't fully understood because they don't understand themselves. So this becomes multiplied with the aspect of being an intuitive type. And therefore you just start to see other people as not being able to understand the complex nature of who you are and who your personality is. And the reality is you're probably changing your personality every year or so, and it's hard for people to keep up. And this is why it's really difficult to help somebody in that age group when it comes to finding their personality type at times, because personality is shifting so much. But it's just important to remember that not everyone who isn't, like you, who doesn't understand you, this isn't going to be something that you're going to be able to just easily solve with personality type alone. If nobody in the world understands you, it's not because you're an intuitive type. It's because something else is going on. Intuitive types can easily get along with other people and be understood if they learn how to properly develop into someone who can communicate with others, which is what personality typology is about. That's like one of the core aspects of Jung when he talked about personality typology, is finding out how to communicate with others in a meaningful way and how to understand yourself. So just remember that just because people are different from you in terms of your personality type doesn't mean that that's going to be the one thing that leads to you being misunderstood or you misunderstanding other people, these sorts of things. Your personality type doesn't identify all of the interactions of your life. Your personality in and of itself does. Your identity does. Remember, you are a person who just so happens to be a personality type. It is not you are a personality type, and therefore that defines you, your actions, your behaviors, your interests, everything. All right, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion on personality typology, and identity. The one thing that I hope you take away from this video is that you are not your personality type. You are you, and you have a personality type. And that you shouldn't over-identify with your personality type, and instead you should be you. Don't be afraid to have interests or ways of acting that aren't perfectly in alignment with your personality type. You are you first, and you simply have a personality type. And that type is simply a lens to help you better understand yourself and others and grow from what you can figure out about that type. Let me know what you think about this video down in the comment section below. I would like to remind people that I do have a Patreon if you'd like to support me in this channel. Simply supporting me for $1 over on Patreon is actually a really big help. And if everyone who subscribed to this channel supported me for $1 on Patreon, it would be very easy for me to get by and keep this channel going without having to worry too much. Other than that, I would like to remind people that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, as well as coaching if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been a Sarah from a Sarah Site. Have a good one.